Okay, my name's Joel, and today we are going to play with rotating cards and Animation State Behaviors, which is a really cool feature of Unity that I don't see highlighted very often. And we're going to use it to determine the percentage of completion of an animation so we can do some stuff at a certain point during that animation. That being flipping some cards around. So I've got this card that I've made, a good card in fact, and if I push F, it'll flip around and we'll get the card back, which is also quite good. So we're going to be doing this, and we're going to start from scratch, and we're going to do the whole thing, and it's going to be cool. Start with a new scene, and we'll go ahead and just save this. Save scene as. Go into scenes, and we'll call this cards too. You can call it whatever you want. Alright, so let's make the card first. We're going to go over the scripts as we get to them. But first, let's make what we need to rotate. So we're going to be building this on the UI today, so we're going to be using some of the UI features, starting with a canvas. Everything in the UI system must be underneath a canvas. And we're also going to set this to a camera, screen space camera, drag in our main camera here so that it's all right here, rather than giant and super big. Also, constant, no, not physical size, scale with screen size, and then we'll set this to height. This is my default setting for screen space cameras. Okay, so let's begin. First things first, we're going to create an empty and call this card holder. I just like to keep things neat. And then we'll create our card under that. This is going to be our card. And our card's going to have two components to it. UI image. This is going to be the front of the card. And let's make this the correct size. Let's make it a sort of a card-like shape. I'm dragging and holding Alt to scale it in both directions. And then underneath the front of the card, we're going to need some text. Oh, before I do the text, let's make a nice little inner background. So we'll do one more. Actually, let's duplicate the front so we get an exact same size. Put it underneath there. Call this BG for background with no slash. And I'll grab the corners here, hold Alt, and just shrink it down so it's an inner border. And then we'll just change the color to a nice blue color. Just a way to kind of create a slightly nicer looking card. Now, we may need our text. Excuse me. So let's make the text bold. Center, center. We will move it up. Make it a bit bigger, or the box a little bit bigger. And then scale the size up so it fits pretty nicely. We're going to call this a good card, because this is clearly a good card that we're making. Let's call this the title. And then we'll duplicate that, bring it down, make it a little bit bigger, and then call this the description. We'll call this good description. And that'll do it for the front. We'll just duplicate this, call this one the back. The background BG we are going to make a reddish color. Title and description can stay that, but we're going to call this the back. And then for our description, the back description. Okay, cool. So these are the basic pieces that we need. I'm going to turn the back off, but this is what we're going to be doing. When we flip the card, we're going to be swapping in the back at just the right time. In fact, I'll show you. We can grab this and we're going to rotate it, and right when it gets to be perfectly 90 degrees, when it's totally invisible, we'll be swapping the back out for the front, and it'll look like a totally seamless animation. So this is the card. Pretty simple. Now we're going to make an animation for the card. So let's go to the animation tab. If you do not have an animation tab visible, you can grab that from Window, Animation, which is not to be confused with Animator, which we will be using in a moment. But Animation, and we're going to create a new animation. Now it likes to put these in wherever the last place you were looking, so I'm going to come back up to Assets, Animations, and I'm going to call this card flip 4. I've done a couple of these for practice already. So, what do we need in here? We need to add a property, rect transform, and it's going to be a rotation property. We're going to come to the very center of this, we're going to hit record, and we are going to rotate to 90 degrees, which will make it totally invisible. And that is really all we need, because now it's doing this. This is exactly what we want. We want a card that looks like it's spinning. Okay, so that's that done. Next, we need to look at the animator for this. So it automatically added an animator to our game object here because we added an animation to it. Let's go take a look at the animation real quick, find the one that you just created, and make sure that loop time is not checked. We don't want it to be spinning forever. And let's go to the Animator, which is here. You click on the object and then go to Animator. And if you don't see the Animator tab here, you can just go to Window, Animator, there. Okay, so what do we have to start with? We have our card flip 4 that we just made. And right now it's the default animation, which is not what we want. We don't want this to be flipping all on its own immediately. We want to transition to this, so we're going to right-click, create state, empty. We're going to make an empty state that doesn't contain anything. If I click on this, you see the motion is none, so it won't do anything. We're going to make this the default state, which is set layer as default. There you go. Okay, so now we can create a transition from here to here. And in order to do that, you click on the centerpiece, unfold this, and I've already got this in here apparently, this flip. What you do is you come over here and you click this button and you go to trigger, and then you type in flip. And so now you can come over, when you have a transition selected, you can select things from there. Right now flip is the other one, so we'll go ahead and leave that there. But what we don't need is we do not need an exit time, because this doesn't need to exit back out of anything. We're gonna manually, we're gonna come back when we're done, right? We don't need to exit from this state, right? And we don't need any duration transition. We want our transition to happen immediately. We don't want any blending. So that goes us from our blank state to the card flip. When we come back, we do want a exit time, but we don't want the exit time to take any time. We just want it to happen as soon as it's done. What this means is, as soon as the card flip 4 animation is finished, the exit time will begin, and since it's 0, it'll just be back in the normal state. So that's all we need in here. We have our card flip, we have our state, now we have a way of triggering it. So, what's next? Now we're going to go over the scripts. So we have only 2 scripts here. We have a example state behavior, and we have the card script. We're going to go over the example state behavior first. So what this is this inherits from state machine behavior, which is not a mono behavior. It's a whole new thing, right? And it allows us to access really interesting and useful components of the animator, such as on-state update and on-state exit. There's a whole bunch of these pre-made methods that this thing uses, and I'll show you another example here. Public override void on-state enter, for example, right? So it'll pre-populate the block here if you just start in typing public override void, and it gives you all of the things that it needs to take in this case an animator, some state info, an index layer, and a controller, which is not what we need for this, but just letting you know that there are pre-built methods for Unity, and what they do is everything here in the on-state update will be happening every frame while this animation is running. On-state exit will happen once when this animation is done, when it concludes. So let's go over this piece by piece. At the top we have a % of animation complete, which I've limited to a range between 0 and 1, because this is essentially between 0 and 100% of the animation complete. And this is for us to set. This is basically stating at what point during the animation do we want to do something. We have a bool to see whether or not our thing has happened yet, whatever we're wanting to decide to do, which is actually this action right here. Our callback, which is using system, which I've used before in my previous tutorials, and if you've not used them before, an action is basically a method that you can pass in as an argument, and this dot callback plus equals callback is adding whatever this method is on to our local one here. So whatever we pass in, it's going to do that stuff when we're ready for it. So in the update, we're doing some things. We're going to do a check to see if the animator state.normalized time is greater than or equal to the percentage of animation complete that we set. This mathf.repeat, all this does is handle looped animations. The normalized time of an animation is usually between 0 and 1, but if it's a looped animation, it will actually be bigger than that. So this is an important fix for looped animations. Now our example doesn't use looped one, but if you ever had a looped animation that you wanted to know what percentage complete it was for any given loop it was going to go through, you'd want to do the mathf.repeat. And the 1 just clamps it between 0 and 1. In fact, we can take a look at this here. Loops the value t so that it is never larger than the length, which is what we put in there, and never smaller than 0. And this part right here, the minus 0.05, is kind of a margin of error. Because when we're doing this, when an animation gets to the very end, it can decide that it's done fractions of a second before it's actually done, and doesn't actually reach a value of 1. So this is me accounting for that. And also we want to make sure that our triggered rule is set to false, because we don't want to be triggering this thing constantly, we just want to trigger it one time. So if the time is greater than or equal to the time that we're looking for in percentage, then we want to do some stuff. So we're going to say the animation is complete, or not necessarily complete, it's beyond our threshold, it's whatever our percentage is. And then we're going to check the callback, and if it's not null, we're just going to run it. We're going to do whatever we've told it to do, and then set triggered to true so that it doesn't happen again. But then on state exit, we're going to set triggered back to false so that each time it runs, we have an opportunity to do it again. And that's all this is. That's the whole state machine right here. We haven't attached it yet, which is super important, but I wanted to go over it real quick. So let's go back to the animator. Card. It's compiling. Animator, and let's take a look at card flip 4. So now we can click on this add behavior button, and example state behavior is in here. If it obviously if you haven't written it yet, it won't be there, but you can click on new and then add it, and then you can follow along. So I'm going to go ahead and add it there. Now we have our little slider here, but we know that we want this to happen around the exact center. So 0.5. We want to do whatever we're going to do, which we're going to get into in card. So let's go over card. Pretty simple. We have a front, we have a back, we already saw those. We have a private reference to our animator, and we have a private reference to the state behavior that we just made. So at awake, we're just going to grab the reference to our component, our animator component, and in start, we're going to grab a reference to our behavior. And the way that you get that is you go to your animator and you do get behavior, which is very similar to get component, but you pass in, you give it the type of whatever the type that you've made. You could even just do like state machine behavior, but you don't want to do that because you would give us access to our, all the methods that we've put in, most particularly this initialize, because we want to be able to give it a callback. And that's exactly what I do here. I grab the behavior that we just got, I initialize it, and we give it a method. So the method we're going to give it is flip, which is very simple. It just says if the front is active, then shut the front off and turn the back on and return. If the back is active, then shut the back off and turn the front on and return, which isn't really necessary because it's at the bottom, but I wanted to be consistent. The only other stuff we have in here is a check to see if I'm pushing the F key, and if so, we're going to play the flip animation, which is animator.setTrigger flip, which is the thing that we made over here, this little flip variable for the transition. Note, remember that. So this is everything we need. If I push the F key, we're going to flip the thing over, and when it gets to 50% of its animation, it's going to run this method right here. So let's go see how all this comes together. Let's come back to our scene, make sure our card actually has a card script. Grab the front, grab the back, and note that the back is off by default because we're going to be turning it on. And then let's see how it works. We'll hit play. I will push F, and we will flip over and we get the back, and I can push it again. And this will do it every time. It'll toggle it basically because it checks to see which one is open when we do it. And that is the gist of it. I think it's a pretty cool way of doing things. This is also really super useful in more action-oriented games. If you've got, say, a long, really impressive attack animation, and you want the hitbox for the attack, the damage dealing component, to occur somewhere toward the end of the animation, not toward the beginning, you can set that to trigger whatever percentage of completion you want to do. So that's that. Hopefully you found it useful, and I'll see you next time.